Good evening. It has been definitely a hectic day here in Montreal, and not really sure what the appropriate dedication is at this juncture because we're still completely not fully aware as to what exactly happened and what exactly is going on. But considering that it has been quite a not pleasant day in Montreal, and whatever the appropriate fashion and language we should be using right now to dedicate this year in honor of whoever was hurt or affected by what happened today, that's what we're doing. I'm not sure what language to use, but whatever. What's the
You don't
if
really
you think of
know
one
state of affairs.
exactly, if you think of one said about if you think of one said about someone who doesn't know all the kavanas, all the mystical intentions that one is supposed to have during davening, that he should have in mind that whatever mystical intentions are supposed to be had should be had.
Mhm.
So if we're kind of in the dark a little bit still as to what's going on and what happened. So whatever the appropriate language is supposed to be to dedicate this year of learning of light of Torah for the darkness that was, let that language be used appropriately here. So this week's quota is we're in Samachtas, and we're continuing the process of salting meat. And we began by learning some principles of salting meat from the beginning of Siman Ayin, Kabbalah Karpota, the same way it absorbs, the same way it is extracted. We also had this principle that whilst it's busy producing, it doesn't absorb. And then from there, we went back to Samachtas, and we kind of went through the process. We talked about washing the meat in advance of salting, and then the salting itself. That's what we spoke about so far. In this week's quota, we have it goes from Sif Zion through Sif Yud Dalet, 7 through 14. And there are really two subjects that are spoken about in 7 through 14. The first is 7, 8, 9. I guess okay, let's make it three subjects because really it's let's say 7 and 8 and 9 is about, I guess 10 as well, is about the fact that after one is done salting, one has to rinse off the salt and the process by which that is done. That's 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then 11, 12, and 13 and 14 is going to discuss what happens if the meat wasn't properly salted and then used and then cooked along with other pieces of meat. How do we treat it in terms of bittul, nullification, and so on? Those are two subjects. Washing off the salt after it's done, and then what happens if meat wasn't processed and salted properly, wasn't washed properly, etc. What happens if it ends up being cooked with other pieces, with other meat? Is there bittul, and what kind of bittul, and the like? That's what we're just discussing today. So, beginning with 7 and 8, we have this halacha, right? Before you cook it, it has to be to wash off the salt. So the Gemara that we keep referencing, which we spoke about last week, which says that meat will not be extracted or be released of the prohibition of blood unless it's salted very well and washed very well. And Avdimi would salt and shake off. And from there, the combination of the two different views here, Shmuel and Avdimi, we got this idea to wash first, salt, and then wash afterwards. Now, in the washing afterwards, we have two different languages here. You have menapetz, which means to like brush it off or to like shake it off the salt. And then you have the language of madicha, which means to wash it. Okay? And we're kind of doing a combination of these two in our process. And ideally, we're doing shaking off and then washing twice. Now, why are we doing this? So when it comes to shaking off, Rashi, when he comments on Avdimi, who says menapetz, that he would shake off the salt, Rashi explains that it's specifically speaking about coarse salt. It's very coarse salt, and the blood is absorbed within the salt, and therefore it is prohibited. So you have to rinse it off before you do that. But if it was very thick, shake it off. If you scrape it off, shake it off. But if you had very thin salt, then the salt itself would become like dissolved, and it would be gone. The blood came out, the salt is dissolved. You don't have to worry about it. It's only because it's coarse and it contains some of the blood. You have to shake it off, right? However, the Reim writes that the nitputs, the shaking off that Rav Dimi spoke about, is actually in lieu of or part of the washing that Shmuel spoke of. Meaning to say, it's part of the. It's not just a question of getting rid of it's not just because it's coarse and the coarse blood contains the blood, but you have to remove. Once you're done salting it and there's blood and salt on the surface, you have to wash it all off so that you can then go ahead and cook the meat. Okay, so that brings us to point 2. Point A is only coarse salt. Point B, get rid of whatever's on the surface so that you can, or whatever blood and salt is on the surface so you can cook, coarse or not coarse. And then you have the Rambam and Rashba, who say that you just have to do both. Shake off and wash. And he explains, Rashba explains, you're shaking off the salt so that when you rinse it afterwards, you can do so even in a container where there are no holes in the bottom. If you have holes in the bottom when you rinse off the meat, then everything drains out. But if you washed it off, as let's say most people would at home, remember, we're not doing it in the factory, everybody has pre-made utensils for this stuff. You're doing it in your house. So if you don't shake off the salt and you go straight to washing, and you're washing it in the same bowl with the salt and everything in there, so you have this problem, explains the Rashba. So the water stops the meat from producing, exfoliating, from emitting blood. The water has that effect of making the meat contain itself and not run. The water has that effect. And if the water has that effect, then the salt will effectively make the blood go back into the meat. Absorb. Because the meat is no longer emitting. So the rinsing, the shaking off of the salt is a preparation for your washing. So that way your washing is good. Because if you're washing your bowl without removing the salt, you run into a problem. So combining all this together, which is what, so in addition to that, because Shmuel says he would wash it yafa very well by saying very well by saying yafa twice, Rishonim point out you have to wash it twice. So combining all the above, you end up having 3 things. Shake off the salt and then wash it twice. And that's indeed what we do. That's indeed what the Shulchan Aruch says to do.
When you shake off the salt, flushing salt, in other words, pouring water on it, gets the.
So it seems like first menapes means to literally to scrape it off, to pull it off, and then rinse, and then wash it. Because we're afraid that your washing is going to be done in a bowl that will contain it and ruin your meat.
No, but it's not done in a bowl. It's just held in the water.
Okay, in theory, which would mean right. So again,
Held in the water.
Yeah. So according to Rashba's language, you would be right. Even if you did it in a bowl that was a strainer, you would also be okay. But because of the fear that every person at home doesn't have that necessarily, so we make the process: shake off the salt, or brush off the salt, and then rinse. And that way, your rinsing is going to be done in such a manner that doesn't ruin your meat. Right, but because of what I'm saying, we have leniencies, right? That if you didn't do this whole entire process, maybe it's not going to be so bad after all, right? Because now you understand, it's all because of this fear. Maybe it's going to be stuck in the bowl and you have opinions which say even just the rinsing to begin with is okay. Like Rashi, which said only if it's a coarse salt, you have to get it off because of or the Reim, which said it's just about washing it off, or what did the Reim say? Once you shake it off, you don't even have to rinse it, but if you rinse it, you don't have to shake it off. Right? So we have all kinds of leniencies if it wasn't done properly, which is going to be expressed in the Shulchan Aruch as well. When the first instance, Shulchan Aruch is going to say, do all of this, brush it off, and then rinse and wash. But then it's going to have all these things. What if you didn't do it? And in most cases, it's going to be okay. To such a degree that Ramah is going to say that if all you had was a little bit of water, it's good enough. Relying on those opinions, which say it's all you need to do is just water it once. Right, where we're going to have that, it's going to be in, I think in Ches. Where's that, Ramah? Yeah, the field my yeah. And some are even more lenient. We're going to see there's even more lenient. There's going to be leniencies in post factum, but at least in the first instance, this is what's done. Now, there's going to be, we'll look at this when we learn together, just to keep in mind that the Ramah's language is not going to be very, very clear as to what exactly he wants and what he's asking for. Because to begin with, he's going to say, well, he's going to start off by saying, you Ramah said, you Shulchan Aruch only said to do twice salt, twice rinsing, right? Shaking off and twice rinsing. Actually, we should do 3 rinsing. And then when he goes to describe the actual process, he describes exactly what the Shulchan Aruch just described, which is to shake it off and then rinse it twice. So what are you arguing about? Okay, so there's going to be a Shach Natas to explain exactly what the Ramah is trying to say, but it's not going to be 3 times washing.
Thought that the wiping means.
Sorry?
I would have thought he meant that the first washing is wiping off the salts. Like,
That's right. That's what he ended up
without
saying.
water,
First he says, I argue with you by saying not 2 washing, but 3 washings. And then he says, oh yeah, by the way, when you wipe it off, that's your first washing. Well, that's exactly what the Shulchan Aruch just said. So what are you arguing about? This is what the Shach and Tas discuss, trying to resolve what Ramah is exactly trying to say. Okay. But the because of the way the Shach understands the Shulchan Aruch, he ends up saying that the Ramah is arguing you have to wash first, then wipe it off, and then wash again twice. And that's your extra time that the Ramah is asking for. That's the way the Shach ends up explaining it. Okay. And again, as I mentioned, you have this whole discussion about the B'diavad and the leniencies around that, considering that it's all based on multiple views that we're taking into consideration in being stringent. Then I'm also going to add that the washing of the salt can even be done with juices. It doesn't even necessarily have to be water, which is an interesting little idea. Okay, that's pretty much Zayin and Ches. Then I'm also going to add other things which are necessary, namely that the question of what happens, like if the salt, when you're washing the salt, does it have this great enough power that let's say the bowl in which you salted was a milchik bowl. Does it now make your meat fleshik? And he's going to conclude that the answer is basically no, even though in the first instance you shouldn't do so. But the Ramah is going to address that as well.
Are you allowed to reuse salts?
No, we're going to learn that. May not reuse the salt. We're going to learn that in a minute. We're going to learn that in a minute. You cannot reuse the same salt again. Yeah.
You use the salt for a second salting, is that what you're asking? I'm sure you can't consume it, that blood.
Like use it
Yeah.
for more meats.
The Ramah brings this up here because the whole discussion here is about whether the salting is going to cause the blood to go back in, and then the same consideration would be whether if the vessel is milchik or fleshik, and we're going to see there's this discussion about that. Yeah, and we're going to look out for the Shach and the Taz discussing if that utensil is clean and the like. Okay. That's pretty much as far as Zayin and Ches goes. In Tes, we continue with what happens if you skip this last washing and you just went straight to cooking. In Ches, it's going to have what happens if you didn't do the washing properly. So you had a little bit of water, you didn't do the whole 2 times, or you didn't rinse it off properly. That's going to be the Ches. But in Tes, the B'diavad in Tes is going to be, what if you didn't do any of the washing afterwards? You just, after salted it, put it right into a pot to make your cholent and forgot to rinse off your salt. You have a very salty cholent, but what's the halacha there? That's going to be in Tes. And the Shulchan Aruch is going to rule that you're going to have to you're going to have 60 times the amount of salt. Right? The pot will have to have 60 to the ratio of the salt. Why would you have to have 60 to the ratio of the salt?
Because the blood was already removed.
So why the ratio of the salt?
Contains the blood.
Salt contains the blood, which what you're suggesting is, so I was pushing for, is that you have Hanan. The salt is not Isser. Salt is not prohibited. Blood's prohibited. Salt contains blood in it. So there are those who suggest that's the reason why you have 60 against the salt, because the salt becomes Hanan. However, why is that a problem to learn that way in the Shulchan Aruch? What's the Shulchan Aruch view on Hanan? Not the Ramah. Machaber, Shulchan Aruch, the Machaber. What's his view on Hanan? There's no Hanan by Shari Surim. So the salt will not be Hanan. So why would the Machaber then require 60 times the salt?
If he has no way to measure it.
Oh, because you have no way to measure how much. Exactly. So you have to, you have no,
More than the.
correct. You can't be more than the salt.
Less, but how do you know?
Correct. And that's what the Shach says. Because according to the Machaber, it's not just Chanan by Shari Yisurim, you cannot say that the reason is Chanan. It's only because we don't know how much blood comes out. So you go to the max measure. So if you go to the not 60 times the amount of salt, very good. The Taz actually brings the view of the Rashal, which says that you actually need 6 times the meat.
60 times the meat.
Yes, because the blood is considered Isser Davuk. Remember we had Isser Davuk attached. Even if you don't say Chanan, you still say you have to have 60 against the Davuk, and the meat's considered Isser Davuk, and therefore you have to have 60 times that. However, it's pretty much rejected because the blood actually strains, so it's not mamash davuk, right? Especially once you put the salt into the water, it starts to release. And so you to consider that meat to be davuk to the blood is a stretch, as the Shach explains. Doesn't stick to it. It's correct. Okay.
If one washes with the salt still on it, could you then salt it again to get the blood that re-entered it?
Oh, we'll get to that in a second, actually. In 1 second, we'll get to that. Very good question. Let's follow up. Before we get to that, though, because we just said that the meat is not davuk to the blood, so when you're measuring 60 against the salt, you could even include the original piece of meat, even according to Rama. And the Rama Taka says that the entire pot, including the piece of meat, is in the 60 against the salt, because why not? It's a perfectly good piece of meat. It was never davuk or chanan. It's already salted. It's not davuk, not chanan. So even the meat itself can be part of the 60 to nullify the salt.
What does davuk mean exactly?
Davuk means attached. We had the example of davuk when you had non-kosher fat attached that hasn't been removed from the meat that in which it is entwined. That would be the original davuk.
You nullify
The entire piece of meat, not even according to the Machaber. Yeah, correct. Right now, it's because it will be the slowest to release. At least one of the ways of explaining was because it's going to be the slowest to release that. It's going to be slowest to release that fat. Right.
Yeah.
One of the reasons was because it's going to be slowest to release that fat. The davuk is going to be slowest to release that fat. Even he doesn't say chanan, so why do you have to nullify even the piece of meat? Because it's going to be the slowest to release the thing that's davuk to it. But when it comes to meat, as it comes to blood, as we're explaining, it's not the case. It runs out. Correct. And if even Amos says the piece of meat will be part of the 60 to nullify it. Now the Ramah is going to add an interesting halacha, which is going to be contested, but in the Shach and the Taz you'll see this contesting this halacha. But the Ramah brings this halacha that because if you took a piece of meat, right, you didn't rinse it off, it's still salty, you cooked it, so you need 60 against the salt. Now, when you cook that meat with the salt, you cooked in a kli rishon or kli sheni. So kli rishon for sure, you need 60 against it, right? Because you're cooking the whole thing together, 60 against it. What about kli sheni? Do I say in a kli sheni that has a cooking and a power that would require 60 against the salt? To which Rama says, because it's salty and the kli sheni isn't totally cool, the combination of the two makes it a cooking factor. And therefore, even in the kli sheni, so if you took that salty piece of meat that hasn't been washed off, and instead of putting it onto your pot in the stove, you put it into your bowl of soup. You couldn't just take it out. You'd have to have 60 against the ratio, if there's 60 against the salt. Right? And that's because the salty factor adds to the heat factor to make it a full cooking. That's going to be contested.
Well, we already know what we learned.
The Rashal is going to be lenient here, and the Shach and Taz are going to discuss that as well.
Has an effect.
Right. So we looked at it once upon a time. So therefore, the Rama saying in this case, well, it wasn't salt for 24 hours, right? So it's not covered or 18 minutes even.
18 minutes. Obviously, salt has.
Right. So let's say happy salt 18 minutes was only if it was no, what was 18 minutes? Remind me. Was any salting? Was any salting? Yeah.
Salt.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. So that would support this idea of the Rama. But anyway, our Shah is going to be lenient here, and the Shach and the Taz are going to discuss that as well. When to be machmer, when not to be machmer, have some rubba and the like. If, however, the meat completely dried out before you cooked it, and now, so there it says, to be honest, I don't fully understand it. I'll just tell you what the Rama says, and you tell me if you can understand this. And it doesn't give an explanation here. The Rama says like this: if the meat is completely dried out before you cooked it, so it's salty, it's meat that's salted, you haven't washed it off, but it's completely dried out now. Now he says you're definitely going to have 60 against the salt, considering that it dried.
Against the salt or 6 against the meat?
You're definitely going to have 60 against the salt. You don't have to have 60 against the meat, not according to the Rama and the Mechaber for sure.
Dry.
I don't know. Just read.
Saying that
He's telling you what the Rama says. I'm just telling you I don't understand exactly what he meant, and I was hoping he give me some background if he doesn't. If you read it, it's in Samach Tes.
Same thing, now you're saying.
Look at this booklet here. It's on page where is it? On page 21. Right, page 21, you can read it. And we can permit dry meat even in a clear edition, where there are certainly 60 amounts against the salt on it because it's already dried out. Because the drying out makes the salt smaller volume, and therefore you definitely have 60 against it. Not quite sure, but this is what the Rama says. Anybody? It seems like the drying out reduces the volume of the salt. It's no longer as big, I think. And therefore,
It's dry or wet, I didn't catch that.
that if it dried out, the meat will definitely be 60 times the ratio of the salt.
Oh, the meat will be 60.
Yes. Meaning it'll be 6 times its own surface, which is the salt. Because it dried out, it becomes so small, definitely have 60. This is what the Rama says. And I'll be honest, I'm sharing with you, I didn't fully get it. Maybe by today's Monday, maybe by Wednesday, I'll figure it out. But when we learn inside, maybe I'll get some new insight, but that's what he says. Couldn't find anything on the page that would help, that would add. Yeah, there's a comment there, the comment from the shop, but it doesn't really help anything. Doesn't, at least not in this regard. Okay. Then the Rama continues. Once the salt has been used once, it cannot be used again. The Shach, however, says b'diavad it would be okay. Now, what's considered b'diavad? What's considered? Sorry, yeah. Where is that? Yeah, the Shach says it's b'diavad can be mutter, and the question is what's considered b'diavad? B'diavad means after you already used it, you already cooked that meat, and now it's ready to eat. What does b'diavad mean? Once you did it, it's okay. And indeed, in this case, the Torah Chatas writes that if you didn't, that b'diavad means that you went in and cooked it. So if you salted and you use that salt and salted another piece of meat, which you shouldn't have, if you went in and cooked it, b'diavad, it's okay. If you didn't cook it yet, rinse off that meat, rinse off that salt, and start the process over, salt it with fresh salt. That's what you asked, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So again,
Say again?
say that again.
You salted meat.
What is-
Now you took that salt and salted another piece of meat. Shouldn't have done that. But you did. If you cook the second piece, it's already b'diavad, it's fine. Shach. If you didn't cook it yet,
You realize.
rinse it off and start the process again with fresh salt. In other words, the old salt may not be as potent to extract blood, but it's not going to be so bad that it'll push new blood in that you can't get out with a new set of salting. Okay. Even though there's a Minchas Yaakov that actually argues, there actually is an opinion which argues that it might do that, and but once you salt it with bad salt, it's too late. There is such an opinion, but that's not the opinion that we're going to be accepting here in the Shach. Yeah, and certainly you couldn't eat that salt after you use it. Salt, that's what after you use the salt meat, you can't certainly eat that salt. That's what the Rama writes. However, again, because the salt itself is not kosher, if the blood that's in it that's not kosher, and we already said that the blood can run out, the Shach is actually going to propose that there is such a possibility if it's so dried out and the blood's no longer there, you could use the salt. I don't know why someone would be in such, I guess people were in such dire poverty, salt was like something that they wanted to reuse, I suppose. Okay, that is Tes. Now comes Sif Yud. Sif Yud is actually, I find it very interesting. Because if there's going to be a discussion on whether or not you can believe a non-Jew, your help in the house, when they say they prepared the meat properly. And what are the circumstances under which you can believe them? Particularly in this instance, the you salted your meat as you should, and then you left the kitchen, whatever, and you're around the house, and your help cooked the meat. Now you don't know if they rinsed off if they washed off the salt yet. So which means I don't know if I need to have 60 against the amount of salt. Right? But they could have went ahead and cooked it. So we actually have 3 different considerations here that will help us believe the non-Jew. And the discussion in the Shulchan Aruch, sorry?
What you say?
He's saying I did it. He's saying, oh, I rinsed it off. It's all good. Don't worry about it. I washed the salt off. It's fine. We have his word. Right. So there are 3 different things that help us believe him. That there are 3 different things that stack up reasons for why we should believe him. And the questions in the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah and the commentaries in the side are going to be, how many of these things do you have to have in order to actually believe him? And the Ramah is going to have the lowest of all the bars. Namely as follows. So it's like 2, which comes by 3. Namely, one's going to be, he's speaking nonchalantly, which means he's not being inquisitive and he feels like he's going to be, if he says the wrong thing, he's going to be punished. Right? If you're questioning about it, and he, right? And he knows that.
You didn't tell him. Did you remember?
Exactly.
But
But he's
remember it? What's
exactly. Exactly. So we'll get to that in a second. But yes, that's what it's called Mesiach L'Pitumai. That's the expression. He speaks nonchalantly. Right? That's number 1. That's reason to believe in number 1.
Oh, is this the utensil you used to rinse it?
Something like that. Some clever way to do it. Where it doesn't sound accusatory or inquisitory. That's a word. And that's 1. Mesiach L'Pitumai. 2 is going to be if there's somebody walking around. This is the principle called mirtas, where
Someone is Jewish or not Jewish.
not a Jewish person, even a child, but someone of the household who the non-Jew is afraid to misbehave. So at any moment, someone can walk in and see me throw the meat in without salting it. So I'm afraid to do something wrong. That's mirtas.
He knows even a little kid.
Mashkichim and hashkachas rely on this mirtas a lot. And the big question of when you rely on mirtas, and when yes, when no. Right? When you're allowed to rely on mirtas, when you're not allowed to rely on mirtas. But mirtas is a big principle in hashkacha, where if the non-Jew knows they're being watched, and under many circumstances you can trust his word because you know he could be caught. It's especially today. Oh, so today it's a big thing, and it's a big big discussion now whether cameras are effective enough to cause mirtas.
Really?
Yes, and interesting. It's interesting because I was listening to a share given by Rabbi Weiss in Yerushalayim. He was making a statistical argument. He was saying the statistics are that people steal less thanks to cameras. So to tell me that cameras don't cause mirtas is like, I don't know what you're saying. Interesting. At any rate,
People know that if you put up a fake camera in your house,
Or
that
just an
there's
eyeball.
that's right.
Not.
You put the sign that says that your house is protected by an alarm itself. It's a deterrent, certainly. Yes. So that's okay. So, but again, I want to make this clear that mirtas doesn't apply everywhere, and where mirtas applies and doesn't apply is a good question. But certainly here, in terms of did the guy was already salted? It's a question: did he wash the salt off? Mirtas is another factor. So one is Mesiach L'Pitumai, he speaks nonchalantly. Second is mirtas, he's afraid because someone's walking around. And the third element is like this: it seems from the earlier sources that rely on the idea of Mesiach L'Pitumai, that he's speaking nonchalantly. We're combining the fact that he himself likes to present a clean food that he's cooking in the house. He doesn't want to be serving an over salty meat, where there's a cleanliness factor, right? And
he would be embarrassed by doing
correct, he would be embarrassed by doing it wrong, and that would be another reason to believe him when he speaks nonchalantly. So when you have 2, nonchalant speak and being afraid, and nonchalant has an extra layer of precaution, which is that he is particular about cleanliness. And the question is going to be: do you have to have all 3 of these? One of the 2? And if you believe you have to have only one, which is Mesiach L'Pitumai, does it also have to have plus cleanliness? That's going to become a discussion. And it seems at the end that the Ramah is actually leaning all the way down. The Shulchan Aruch himself is not clear. It seems from the Shulchan Aruch that he needs to have both. He requires both Mesiach L'Pitumai and mirtas. That he's speaking nonchalantly plus afraid. The Ramah is clear. It's either or. And it even seems from the Ramah that even if he doesn't care about cleanliness, there's an example like a chicken where it's to begin with dirty. And in that case, we still believe him if he speaks nonchalantly because that's enough. Okay, I just thought that was very interesting a discussion. Now, another thing that's interesting is, and to your point about the guy being afraid and how you asked him and whether did you do your job. There's the Bach and the Prisha and others. They suggest that if the guy has been around long enough and he knows that for religious reasons you like to wash your salt, you like to wash your meat, you like to wash the salt off. He's been there long enough. So he knows that you're doing it for religious reasons. So now this view, he has more reason to lie because he knows what you want to hear. Nonchalantly, schmontantly. He knows what you want. He's been doing this for 10 years in your house already. He knows the rules, right? And he knows you want to wash. He'll say, yeah, it's washed. And I'll do the whole shtick. And therefore, you can't believe him if he knows the halacha, even nonchalantly. However, correct.
Exactly what.
He knows because he's a parent. However, the Bach and the Shach reject that. And the Bach explains. Number one, the Shach says to avoid it, make sure he's talking to somebody else who's not like his boss, who's not his boss. But more than that, the Taz, someone else who's not his boss, who's not his boss. Somebody else, let him talk to somebody else. And the Mashiach to somebody else will work. But the Taz actually says the way around. If he knows the halacha and you're his boss, then he's telling you what you want to hear because he knows he has to do what you want him to do. So actually, the fact that he knows the law adds to the mitzvah factor because he knows how important this is to you. And if you found out he didn't do it, he's going to fire you. So Taz flips it on its head, saying that the guy knowing the halacha gives more reason to believe him, not the other way around. Interesting. I just found it interesting. I'm not giving a psak, obviously. I just found it very, very interesting because it's like something that we all deal with. Maybe not in the question of rinsing off salt, but in other things like which spoon did you use, which this did you use, And it's just interesting to hear all these different perspectives and elements. Okay, that is Sif Yud. Sif Yud Aleph and Yud Beis, and Yud Gimel and Yud Dalet. The last four Sifim is the second subject, which is what is the law if we didn't salt it properly and it got mixed up with other piece of meat or cooked other piece of meat. So you have Machlekes, Rosh, and Ravid, which is as follows. It's similar to Hanan, but not exactly Hanan. Because again, this is not so simple to say that blood inside of meat is Hanan. We already established that earlier. The blood inside of meat doesn't necessarily equal Hanan. Not even Issa Dovuk. But nonetheless, the Rosh is like this. The Rosh is of the view that if a piece of meat wasn't salted and then was cooked with other pieces of meat, you have to have 60 against the entire piece of meat. Now, why is that? For the same reason why you have to have 60 against the salt if you didn't wash the salt off. Because we don't know how much blood the meat's going to produce. So you have to go to the max, which is the whole entire piece of meat. That's the Rosh. However, the Ravid says it was never salted in this case. So the same standard we're applying to when it was salted to the salt, he's applying to the meat when it wasn't salted. Because I don't know how much blood the meat's going to produce. And therefore, 60 against the whole piece of meat. That's the Rosh's view. The Ravid, however, says, don't go so far. It's not going to produce that much. You can go by much less than just 60 of the meat itself. Only Dorim Mu'at. You do some sort of estimation of how much it's going to produce, and that's it. He doesn't say how, but it's much, much less than the entire piece of meat. Sorry? I assume you do the estimation because you lived in your kitchen and you've been salting meat for the last 10 years since you built the house or got married. So you've seen, you asked the butcher to cut steaks up, and before you cooked it, you salted it, right? So you know how much meat, how much blood comes out. It's not that much already, right? So you kind of know. So you do a little bit more, let's say. So you're a little generous on the estimation. But how much you mean? A whole piece of meat? That's what the Ravid thinks of it. That's number one. Number two, the Rosh, however, in his view, where he says you have to have 60 against a piece of meat, what about the piece of meat itself? Is a piece of meat kosher, considering that the blood is equally distributed everywhere? And once you have 60 against the meat, which is the max volume of blood, the blood's distributed everywhere, that piece of meat can be eaten, no problem. That's one view. Whereas others say, no. If the blood was cooked in it, it's going to be there more than anywhere else, and the piece of meat is also kind of like a dovok situation. So two machlokes: A, nullify the meat or estimate how much blood comes out. B, even if I do have to nullify the volume of the meat, does the meat itself become kosher or not? And the Shulchan Aruch rules like the like the Rosh. You have to have 60 against the piece of meat. And then the Ramah introduces the fact that it's our custom to be stringent and not eat that piece of meat, even when you have 60 against the whole piece of meat. Unless you have guests for Shabbos and you need that piece of meat and you have to serve somebody. You have guests coming, you need to do that, then you can rely on the lenient ones that say the piece of meat is fine because the blood's equally distributed everywhere.
Clearly, we understand that when you cook something, so it also absorbs.
It absorbs plus.
So then we can understand that the blood doesn't come out as fast as if something was.
That's the argument for Isodovuk. That's precisely the argument.
The argument that said you need to take out the piece because the blood is not being removed.
It's not equal distribution,
Not
correct?
Strongly as if you had salted it.
That's precisely the argument for Isodovuk. By Isodovuk, it's not equally distributed. It's going to be more in the original piece, and that's the argument to be stringent. Take that piece of meat out, even though it's cooking and the blood's going everywhere, and you have 60 against the maximum volume of blood, which is the size of the meat, but the blood's still going to be contained in the meat more than anywhere else. And therefore, said that I'm on the first instance, we're going to be stringent unless there's a need, and we're going to be lenient. Okay, that's Yud Aleph. Yud Beis is based on the Gaonim, which say that meat has to be salted within 3 days of shechting. After 3 days, the blood is now stuck inside the meat and it's not coming out.
This is a big deal.
Doesn't matter if you froze it.
Shipped internationally.
Yes. So the Rambam of Uppenberg adds that if the blood, no, sorry. First of all, he says, okay, it's something else. I'm sorry that I'm not add this. Where is that? Yeah, it's a good opinion. The Rambam, however, adds, where did I see it? That if you put it in water during those 3 days, if you put it in water during those 3 days, it resets your clock to back to 3 days again. Didn't I see that in Rambam? Where is the Rambam? Oh, it's in Yud Gimel. It's in Yud Gimel, which is not in this book here. No problem. Shamash and Aliyah. Yeah. Yes. The Shulchan Aruch in Yud Gimel writes that if you put it into water before those 3 days are up, then it resets your 3 days. Anyway, back to the main halacha. So they're going them against it. After 3 days, the blood stuck in the meat, it doesn't come out, can't salt it. However, the Maram Rottenberg writes that nonetheless, you can still grill it because grilling has its capacity to extract the blood just like salting does. Right? We spoke about this, that all you have to do is minimal salting, and then you can do that. And then you can grill because there's no pot that's like holding everything in. Everything streams out because it's direct flame. And then that will be enough, even if you left it 3 days without salting it. Okay. Now the question becomes, what happens if you cook it after you grill it? Do I say grilling gets all the blood out and when I cook it later, it's fine? Cook it in a pot. Or do I say that the pot is going to extract more that didn't come out during the grilling and it's a problem? The Shulchan Aruch rules, first of all, obviously after 3 days without salting, you cannot salt it anymore, but you could grill it. Once you grill it, you shouldn't cook it, but if you cooked it, it's okay because we assume that everything came out during grilling. And the Taz, is going to bring the Rashal, which is going to say that even post factum, if you grilled it and then cooked it later, usher, because new blood is definitely coming out when you cook after grilling. And then Ramah is going to add that you shouldn't even leave the meat around for more than 3 days without salting it, which is why all the meat that we have is salted. Because after 3 days, you may not cook it, only grill. So if all day, you're buying meat, you cut it up, right? And now you plan on eating pot roast tonight, so you salt meat. But that other piece of meat, I'm going to grill it in next week. So I'm going to leave it out. I'm not salting it. I want to grill it. Mm-hmm. So the Rambam said we're concerned that you're going to forget that and cook it. And now you have a problem. And therefore never even leave meat unsalted for 3 days. You want to grill it now. Which is why, again, we all have salted meat. The producers who are packaging the meat and taking it home are not expecting you to salt it. They're assuming you may grill it, but you might do something else. And especially, which is probably more than 3 days after it's been slaughtered, probably after it's been shechted. And therefore, as per the Rambam, you cannot leave meat around unsalted, lest someone use it in the wrong way, which is to cook it rather than grill it. Yeah, what we're going to say?
Freezing. Do they have fridges back then?
Did they have fridges back then? No, I don't think they had fridges. But in
Not-
like colder places, they would have had underground storage, which would have been just as good as freezing in Europe during the winter. I don't see anything in the commentary here, but maybe we'll see on Wednesday. Good question. I know. Okay, your Gilmore, as I mentioned, just said that when you,
What
sorry,
about, maybe I guess grilling it, yeah, like, it takes out
blood.
the blood. So if you know there's not kosher blood in it, then like you can't do like a bottle, you can't mevatel the blood somehow before you even take out the
In the battle, it's lechatchila. You can't lechatchila go nullify something, right? Okay, your Gilmore is going to add, which I mentioned before, that once if within those 3 days you put it in water, you reset the clock for 3 days. And if you're not sure if it was done within 3 days, he said that you're in doubt, it's okay. You know you salted it, you're not sure if you did it within 3 days or not, it's fine. And finally, the last sif is going to be meat that wasn't salted, left for 3 days, and then mixed with other pieces of meat. What's the halacha then? So the Shulchan Aruch is going to say, bottle beroiv. It's nullified by the majority. Now it seems, from the way the Shulchan Aruch is phrasing the case, it's you have a piece of meat that wasn't salted, left for 3 days, and then you have other pieces of meat that were salted properly within 3 days. That's what he says, you can cook it. And you can cook it even, it's bottle beroiv, because it falls into a 1-to-2 ratio, even though it's a nice piece of steak. It's something that shouldn't be bottled at all. Nonetheless, the blood is not royal iskabed. The blood is not worthy of serving. And again, blood and meat are not the same thing. The meat is totally fine. It's the blood absorbed in the meat. So even if the meat is royal iskabed, worthy to give to a guest, and wouldn't be nullified by 1,000, the blood is not at that level.
Would the blood somehow become like pus?
No, I didn't see anything. But what you do find here is like this. The question is like this. The blood, we already have this principle that anything that's davar sheyesh matirin, something which can be easily turned into kosher, we don't nullify it. Right? So here, this meat hasn't been salted in 3 days. You have a way out to use it perfectly fine and grill it.
Right.
So why is it considered davar sheyesh matirin, and therefore you can't cook it? So 2 reasons are given here. A, it's yesh matirin, but not for what I want, which is cooking. It's yesh matirin for something else. Moreover, when you grill, you lose certain fats that you would have had if you cooked it. And when there's a loss involved, we don't say that davar sheyesh matirin isn't nullified unless there's going to be a loss. If there's a loss, then we say it is nullified. And here, if I use the heter root, I would incur a loss, and therefore it is nullified in its current state of existence. Yeah. Okay, this is pointed out by the Shach and the Taz and others. Okay. Right. The Taz adds, by the same token, where you have a piece of meat that wasn't salted in 3 days, and it's mixed with other pieces that were salted properly, it's nullified by the majority. The Taz says, by the same token, even within 3 days, if I have 2 pieces of meat that were salted properly and 1 piece of meat that wasn't salted, and it's within 3 days, and they're not mixed together, it's also nullified. I don't have to go ahead and salt all those pieces again. So I have 2 pieces salted properly, one that hasn't been salted, but it hasn't been past 3 days since that piece of meat wasn't salted. There too, the application of nullified by majority would exist. So they question why the Shulchan Aruch goes to this other case where it's too late to salt it. Even if it's not too late to salt it, it would still be nullified by the majority because you would ruin the meat if you salted all 3 of them. So the nullification there should apply. And indeed, the Taz and the Rashal say it does. So the question why the Shulchan Aruch goes to the more lenient view.
Shouldn't it really be obvious by the way it looks that it wasn't salted?
I wondered that actually. I don't know. It's hard for me to answer. I've never done this process. I don't know. I'm not all from the books. It's not from experience. I don't know. Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. And finally, the Rama adds, if something was cooked without being salted and then mixed up later, it's also the same nullification by the majority. I mean, not just before it was cooked, but even after it was cooked. So unsalted piece of meat that was accidentally cooked and then mixed up with other pieces of meat that were cooked after having been salted, nullified again, because again, that piece of meat is not the usher, it's only absorbed of that which is forbidden.
Why don't they like say
Okay.
just taste, like lick every single one?
Oh, where did it have that thing about taste? Ooh, thank you for reminding me. I missed that piece.
Like,
There is that case. Hold on a second. Where tasting is available. Hold on. You're right. You're right. There's a certain situation in which tasting is available. I missed it.
like if you licked every piece of meat, you would taste it.
You may not be able to do that though.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to do that? Hold on a second. I have to find it. I found it somewhere. I found it somewhere. I did see that case of tasting. Give me one sec. Oh, you're right. When it comes to the question of the guy telling you that it was washed off, there's a view which we don't rule in the halacha. That's why I didn't mention it. There's a review in the Rishonim, which is not in the Shulchan Aruch. Right? We have two views as to how many tokens does he have to have before you believe him? He's afraid, he speaks nonchalantly, he's cleanliness, whatever. But there's a view which says, actually, you can't believe him in this case at all because you have a way out. Taste it. Taste test. That's the Riva.
Tasted it salty.
Yes. So he says, even though he's afraid, you have to get it tested. And if you can see it's too salty, you know he didn't wash it off. And therefore, sorry, no trusting the guy, even if he's totally afraid. That's where we had that case. That's where we had that case. So to answer your question, I think that in this case, maybe you can do testing because the salt was done. It's just a question of it being washed off. And the washed off itself was already a stringency. Maybe it might not be washed off properly and the salt and blood goes back in and we have leniencies anyway, as we learned. So maybe there I can say tasting. But in the case where it hasn't been salted, I may not be allowed to go ahead and do a taste test. Maybe that's why tasting isn't brought up in this case,
Right.
perhaps.
But you're gonna eat it anyway, probably.
Only if it's buckle.
Oh,
You want to do a taste test to find out if it's not buck, right? All right, so that's our quota for this week. Zion through your Dalit, God willing. On Wednesday, we will read it inside and translate the words and give the relevant shachtas.
When I was reading the Shulchan
Yeah.
Aruch, it looked like he didn't bring down cleanliness.
Nope.
He just brought down like he brought down
So the
he
Shulchan-
knows the rules.
So the Shulchan Aruch isn't clear, but from the Shulchan Aruch, it sounds like you have to do both. That's the way that's the way the commentators understand it. But the Rama says clear, it's one or the other. But because the Rama says one or the other doesn't add the issue of cleanliness. Clearly, even without cleanliness, it's fine. So I'm saying the Rama goes to the lowest bar. It says one or the other, even without cleanliness concern. Very good. Okay, wonderful evening, everybody. Aaron, good to see you.